Fest, your friendly neighborhood and all-inclusive Lit Fest. As you know, this time around, we are all for inclusion, the nuances and the big picture. We feel strongly that to know one's differences is imperative to understanding and eventually to acceptance. More often than not, you will see cultural preferences being stereotyped and limited to cuisine, attire, and dialects. But life is so much more than a preference between rajma chawal and a masala dosa, isn't it? Have we ever wondered, as a crowd, is there a base genetic difference? Is there a reason for the divide? Is the divide even ancestral? Or have we ever delved into the differences which make each other unique? Since the festival is about inclusion, let us begin by acknowledging the differences, the nuances, and eventually accepting all of them. To talk to us more on the same, we have with us Chennai-based data scientist and author Nilakantan RS. He is a problem solver, and running algorithms and in-depth analysis are his two great loves. He holds a degree in engineering from the Clemson University in South Carolina and is currently employed with Ideas to IT as a lead data scientist. He enjoys using analysis and algorithms to find solutions to issues. After receiving his postgraduate degree from Clemson in 2005, he worked at Stanford for 3 years, specializing in handling large data sets. He most recently held the position of the chief data scientist at Funds India, one of the biggest platforms for investment funds in India. In 2017, he joined Ideas to IT to lead and develop its data science practice. He frequently writes about social and political issues, and several publications, including The Hindu, The Wire India, and Caravan Magazine, etc., have published his work. Nilakantan's first book, South versus North, India's Great Divide, examines the puzzle of why the southern states of India appear to be progressing on all fronts significantly better than their northern counterparts. He approaches the topic with clarity, highlighting the sectoral challenges the South has overcome and the policies they have implemented to enable this access. In conversation with him today, we have our moderator, Mr. Jitendra Nayak. An electronics and telecommunications engineer, Jitendra Nayak has established 3 companies in the industrial spectrum of manufacturing, hydraulics, and mining. He has spearheaded the following companies: Angseals Private Limited, Minar Hydrosystems Private Limited, and Minerva Automotors. He has also been actively involved in Baba Amte's institutions in central India, working for leprosy patients and Adivasis of Gadchiroli district in Maharashtra. Nayak is also the founder, trustee of Bantwal Anant Malya Charitable Trust. We are absolutely pleased and amazingly thrilled to have these illustrious personalities with here. May I now request our moderator to kindly escort our author on stage and commence with the session. Big rousing float. The floor is yours, sir.
Good morning, fellow readers. It's my absolute pleasure to be opening this VLF 2023 with the very first session. And I'm really thrilled to have Nilakantan here. Neil is a data scientist, as you all know. He's been introduced very well. And this is his first book. And I went through the book, over the last 4 or 5 days. And it's got fantastic data. So I'm very, very impressed with the book. I had a couple of conversations with him. And then we plan to have a lot of fun. So basically the book talks about the disparities, or what shall I say, the large gaps in so many metrics which southern India has achieved over the northern part of India. And, what are the reasons for that, and where do we go from here? And the disadvantages the South feels, because of this lag. And there are many things which Neil talks about, other reasons. It's some parts in subnationalism, some things to do with leadership and policy. And basically on the main 3 metrics of health, education, and economy, the South has done exceedingly well. There's a glaring gap between the South and central part of northern part of India by and large, excepting a few states, of course. He also talks about in his book, the center's approach of one size fits all, which he feels is flawed. So we'll, talk to him about that because that's a very important part of the book. And the solutions he feels is principally several solutions. And principally, it's decentralization. He feels more power, to be decentralized and given down the line. And then he has certain thought experiments which are very interesting. We'll talk about that as well. So with that brief introduction of the book, I hope, Neil, I've sort of summed it. May I ask you? We'll start on the book essentially, and you as an author. So we know you are a data scientist, and would also like to know where did you get this idea of writing this book, and when did it all start?
Sure. Firstly, thank you very much for having me. This is my first time in Nagpur, and I was very impressed with your the metro, and had something called Saji chicken. Generally, as somebody from Madras, when I travel to northern parts of the country, and when people say that things are spicy, I'm not impressed. But but I ate that, and I was like, oh my god, that is really spicy. Anyway, so thank you very much for having me over here. To answer your question, in 2011, I was living in my home city of Madras, and we had what was an assembly election at that point in my state, right? So I work as a living, I work as a data scientist for a living, so it's just logical for me to, if there is an election coming up, to find what is the probability of impact of my vote in terms of electing my MLA, right? That's a obvious, at least if you're in my line of work, it's an obvious question to ask. So I did that. I did a little bit of calculation and found out what is the probability. As you can imagine, it was an absurdly low number. I discuss a little bit about how to do that in my book. So if you're questioning, it has to do with a little bit of binomial distributions. So, brush it up, read my book, you'll figure the answer, right? But anyway, then natural curiosity led me to figure what would be the probability of my vote impacting the election of my MP. My constituency is South Madras, so logically, like what is the probability of my vote electing my MP? And for whatever reason, I then compared that to a constituency in Madhya Pradesh called Guna. And I've compared, what is the probability of electing an MP in my constituency vis-a-vis Guna. And for some strange reason, I found that the citizen of South Madras, or the voter of South Madras, was about 40% more powerful compared to the citizen in Guna in terms of electing his or her MP. And it just baffled me as to why that happened. And, this was 2011. Here we are in 2023 with a book. So that is kind of the reason why you have this book, which is that, in a democracy, the basic compact is that one person, one vote, which means that all citizens are treated equal. But we have this, situation, and we'll discuss why that situation exists, where we have a tiered system of or gradation in terms of how our votes impact our elections, and in terms of how much of a weight we have in terms of choosing our representatives, both at the state level and for the Lok Sabha, right? And when you have this wide disparity and start wondering into why this happens and what are the effects thereof, that's when, a lot of questions, some answers emerge, but more questions emerge. And I started writing about this in various fora, and eventually a publisher got in touch with me and asked me to write this book, and here we are.
Fantastic. And you've done a great job, Neil, I must say that. For a first time book, fantastic. And I think we should all be grateful that, with your insight into data science, you've been able to actually crunch all those numbers. This book is full of so many, charts and so many comparisons that it's a treat. And I must give it to you, Neil, that you made it very easy for a layman to understand. And that's the beauty of this VLF. Layman like me is actually asking you a data scientist questions from my perspective. And I think that will go very well with the readers here in attendance. South versus North. India's great divide. This is a very confrontational title, don't you think? And on the face of it, one would think, this is like kind of divisive. Where do you get this? And I know it's not. And I know it's not. After reading the book, it's anything but this. So where did you get this? And I love that mango, which is, you know, ripening at the bottom, and green on the top. Fantastic, you know. So can you tell us a little more on this?
Sure. Uh, if there are authors in this room, you'd all know we have very little say on what our books get called, right? As my publisher likes to say, this is an advertisement, it's not a piece of art. And, apparently if you have such bright colors and if you have a punchy title with like an art which is kind of illustrative of the subject itself, and you have an endorsement, in my case, from the finance minister of Tamil Nadu, it sort of, people get curious and pick up the book. And I hope that is the degree to which it, it's indicative, but it is in no way representative of what the actual book is, right? And yes. So it's a good thing that people like me are not in charge of marketing. So yes.
Thank God for that. But yeah, I must say that this book is, talks about India very, very inclusively. And it's natural for us to talk about how we feel that, things can be better. And that's what we are going to talk about today. The three big metrics: health, education, and, economy. In that order. But I think since you picked up the topic of what you talked about, Guna, let's get to population first. That will be very interesting because immediately we have to talk about, what comes to mind is the delimitation. Somewhere in the 70s, was it stalled that, I hope just for benefit of our reader, delimitation was, basically stalled. Basically, it means that, the number of parliamentary seats are given out to states are proportional to their population, right? But then the hindrance is those states which do well on population control are at the raw end of the stake because their representation reduces for having done well. So it's not really reward; it's like punishment for doing well. And so delimitation was sort of frozen, if I can use that word, in I think the 70s somewhere for 50 years, and that is likely to get sort of revoked in 26, which is just a couple of years from now. What happens then? So, Neil, I would like you to speak on this.
Sure. So, yes, and that is probably, it's useful that we start this discussion with the divergence of population between southern and northern India. And here we are in Maharashtra, which kind of sits pretty not just in between geographically, but also in terms of this divergence. So, despite Maharashtra is an interesting case, and we'll come to that separately, right? So we live in some way, shape, or form in a world that Indira Gandhi created, right? Like it's funny, but it is true, which is that, like Mr. Naik said, the 42nd Amendment of the Constitution, which is very, very illiberal, and it was passed at the height of emergency. However, what it did was, at that time, the Indira Gandhi administration made population what was a policy of national importance, right? And therefore, as a sort of accompaniment to that, it froze the number of MPs that each state sends to parliament at 1971 census levels, right? In every other democracy, if you see, what they do is they redraw the constituencies based on every decennial census. That's, again, like, if you believe in the idea that a democracy is supposed to be one person, one vote, that's how it should be, right? Like, that's what every other democracy in the world does. But the reason we did this was exactly to avoid what Mr. Naik said, which is that we do not want to have a kind of a weird, like, we don't want to punish success and reward failure if population control is intended policy, right? Because after all, in a democracy, population is the basic resource on which you run your democracy, right? And therefore, what do, right? So regardless of how illiberal the rest of the 42nd Amendment might be, it was a reasonable compromise of sorts to just freeze it at 1971 census levels and say, okay, now go ahead and control your population. The problem, and it was for 25 years in 1976, right? So it expired, it was supposed to expire in 1999 when during the Vajpayee administration, they extended the freeze to another 25 years, right? So it's now set to expire in 2026. Now, what happens? The divergence between the population of the southern states and the northern states is extreme. And I'll give you an example. In we don't have the 2021 census yet for complicated reasons. We'll skip that. So the last census data for which we have data is 2011. So in the 40 years between 1971 and 2011, Kerala's population grew by 56%. It's the lowest among large states. Rajasthan, which is the highest among large states, grew at 166%. Right now, and
And they started at the same level in.
they start, yeah.
See,
So,
they had the same population in 71.
yeah, so in 1971, Kerala and Rajasthan were comparable states in terms of population, like were indistinguishable almost, like a couple of million here and there. Whereas right now, Rajasthan is as populous as Tamil Nadu, right? Like Madhya Pradesh was like, far less populous than Tamil Nadu, but now is like more populous than Tamil Nadu, right? Like, so what do you do? Like, are you going to basically go, imagine the problem that it generates, right? Like, firstly, the reason why population control, control is a complicated word, but it was the word that was used in the 70s. So pardon my lack of progressive vocabulary, but the reason why any society sort of reduces its fertility rate, which is the way in which you quote unquote control population, is by sending girls to school. It is not that Tamil Nadu or Kerala had like rather nasty methods that people accuse Sanjay Gandhi of having forcefully sterilized people. It's not through any of that. It's that, they had a system wherein, for instance, in Tamil Nadu's case, they had a midday meal scheme, which resulted in a jump in the gross enrollment ratio of girls in school, through middle school and high school and into college. And if you look at the correlation analysis, the greater the number of years a girl child is in school, the fewer children she has. Right? It's just as simple as that. And, both the left and right give weird arguments, right? For instance, one of the bogeymen of the Hindu right quite often is that Muslims have a lot of children. Well, consider the Islamic theocracy of Iran, right? Like in 1981, their overall fertility rate was 6.1. Right now, it's far below replacement. And in the same time, what happened? Iran has greater number of female students in college than it has male students. It's the same case with Tamil Nadu. It's the same case with Kerala. As you increase the number of years of education of a girl child, her probability of having her own children reduces quite dramatically, right? This is, I guess, it's established research and we shouldn't even be debating it. Every country in the world, with the exception of Israel and Saudi Arabia, have followed this trend. And the reason why Israel and Saudi Arabia don't do this is, again, for complicated internal reasons that we won't get into, right? Now, here that we have this, right, like the states of Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, all of these states in these 40 years had about 145 to 160% growth, whereas the states of Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, what was Andhra Pradesh, unbifurcated Andhra Pradesh, all of them had, Kerala had 56, Tamil Nadu had 75, Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh had about 90% growth, right? Like all of them had significantly lower growth. Now, if you do this, what happens? Coming back to the original point of the probability, people like me who elect their MPs in South Madras have a much greater, how do I say this, weight in terms of electing our MP, right? Whereas my counterpart in Guna or in Gorakhpur or wherever it is that he or she is electing MP has far fewer weightage in terms of electing their MP simply because their constituency has become bigger. Because in 50 years, we have not changed that, right? Like we have not redrawn the boundaries as we were supposed to. So we end up with a system where do we want a situation where a citizen in Uttar Pradesh is like worth 40% less of a weight than I am? That's unfair to the person in Uttar Pradesh. But for the same reason, do you want to, if we were to basically do this delimitation exercise and allow it to freeze, I did a back of the envelope calculation in the book, and you can go read it, which is that Tamil Nadu now sends 39 MPs to the Lok Sabha. If we were to allow the delimitation to expire, it will lose 7 MPs and will send only 32. are we then trying to say that for the sin of sending girls to school, Tamil Nadu is going to lose 7 MPs? Again, extremely unfair, right? So what do? There is no good answer. Some political scientists have said, okay, let us retain Tamil Nadu or states like that at whatever number of MPs they have, and increase the number of MPs that states in the Indo-Gangetic Plains have. Well, that basically misses the point of what happens in Parliament, because
Which amounts to the same.
exactly, it amounts to the same thing, because in Parliament MPs vote on our behalf, and it is a zero-sum game. So it just arithmetically makes no difference, right? It is the first solution by a added arithmetic, which just makes no sense. Which is why the answer then becomes, what do you do? The simple, if both options are extremely unfair to one or the other person, then devalue the prize at the end of that race. Therefore, make Delhi less powerful, right? Decentralize it and send most of the powers back to the state, so that we don't have to live in this world where whatever you do will be unfair, right?
We'll get to that. Just on this population metrics, I'm just looking at this chart where you have mentioned the TFR, the total fertility rate. In Bihar and UP is like close to 3, and in the southern states is below 2. So it's below the replacement rates. Having said that, this is somewhere now in 2017. If you go back, I don't really see a chart which shows this for the, let's say 1971. Never mind. You've also sort of given a chart which says, what you expect the TFRs here. An estimate of annual population growth rates for major states in 31 and 41. And surprisingly, or pleasantly surprised that most of those states are going to be like around 0.5. 0.5% is fantastic. That's not very far away. We are talking like 7, 8 years from now or 10 years from now. And if that happens, then, the whole idea of, having this, we get to the union part, but having this program being dished out from the center to all the states and, having this incentive is actually going to work is what I read from here. What would you like to say about that?
Right. So, unfortunately or fortunately, the way in which the effects of population works is that it takes the lifetime or the average lifespan of an adult to actually bear fruit, right? Like, just because you have, so Tamil Nadu and Kerala have had lower fertility rates for a couple of generations now, right? Whereas states in Indo-Gangetic Plains are still at above fertility rates and are expected to fall below fertility, not even 2031 to 41. I think Bihar, Uttar Pradesh are expected to fall even further from that, and that's just an estimate. Whereas the truth that we live in is that for a couple of generations, Tamil Nadu and Kerala have had a fertility rate of about 1.6 or 1.7, right? Which basically, and as a consequence of that, Tamil Nadu is meant to be is expected to be the first state in the union which is expected to have a population decline, net population decline in the decade 2031 to 41, right? Now, to answer your question, Mr. Nayak, is that if you are on a trajectory of a lower fertility rate, the time that it takes to actually result in the population, numbers is the lifespan of a human being, and that is about 75 years. So if they're expected to have lower fertility from, let's say, 2040 or 45 or whatever, we have to wait until 2030, 2310. Am I getting that right? Yeah. The next century, right? Like that's when we have to wait until we get some version of equality, right? And that's too far a time for us to decide what are really urgent matters of democratic representation, resource allocation from the union to the states, so on and so forth. And in this time, it's not as if we are going to live in a status quo, benign status quo, right? It results in serious policy fights which will have no good answer. Like, it's not as if we can basically say that for 150 years let's live in a situation which will be slightly unfair, and from that point on we probably have a situation of fairness. That's just extraordinarily unfair because it's greater than the lives people here are.
That's right. Yeah, we understand that, but I mean, my view was from a total national level perspective. You talked about sending girls to school, so that gives me a cue to get into the education part of things, right? And Tamil Nadu was the first state to start the midday meal program. How important that midday meal program was and how important it was to send girls to school is evident in the fact that today we have, over the last 3-4 decades, achieved such wonderful results in the southern states. And I think the seed of that was the midday meal and the girl child going to school. Would I be off target?
So the midday meal scheme has been transformative in Tamil Nadu, and Andhra Pradesh sort of copied it much earlier, and therefore there have been some effects there as well, right? Like, it's a 100-year-old scheme. We need to be, because politicians in Tamil Nadu like to sort of squabble about who owns it, but it's a 100-year-old scheme. Justice Party, in what was after the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, the Corporation of Madras had elected the Justice Party, and they started what was some version of the midday meal scheme, and the colonial administration very soon ran out of funds to the Indian administered Madras Corporation, and therefore that was shut down in a couple of years. The second iteration of it came about in 1956 under the chief ministership of Kamraj, who extended it to the entire state. That again had a complicated cost sharing agreement between local bodies and the state, and it failed. The third iteration of it, which is what is still in is still functioning in Tamil Nadu, is a version that M.G. Ramchandran came up with in 1982. And the state government undertook the entire financial burden of it and set up an entire bureaucracy to just monitor, administer, do all of these things, right? And that's the reason it worked. Now, before we get into that, the reason why M.G. Ramchandran was able to do that was because he increased sales tax against so much of vociferous opposition. Today, no government in India will be able to do that because we live in a GST regime, right? And that's another important thing I talk about in the book, which is that states no longer have the luxury of policy experimentation because they do not have the luxury of experimenting with their taxes, right? So, if you don't have the luxury of inflow, then what would you do with the outflow? But coming back to the midday meal scheme, what that did was that it, Tamil Nadu was on a slight trajectory upwards, and it was indistinguishable from much of what is Maharashtra and much of northern India in the early 80s and late 70s in terms of its gross enrollment. In the next 10 years, what happened was all gross enrollment shot up, but particularly that of girls. And this is true for all of India, which is that there's always a disparity in the enrollment of boys and girls. And Tamil Nadu, by virtue of its midday meal scheme, just broke that divergence between the enrollment ratios of boys versus girls, right? And M.G. Ramchandran did not think of any of these things. He thought it was a moral issue. He stood there and said that, I know poverty, and, I know that the girl child gets the last meal in the house when the household is poor. Right? He did not think of any of these things. But what that resulted in was that it ended up increasing the gross enrollment ratio, not just in high school, but also into colleges. And then what happened was that generation down the line resulted in a higher female labor force participation, right? And also resulted in a drop in fertility rate. And both these combined resulted in actual sort of increase in the gross state domestic product per capita, which is essentially per capita income, right? It was not as if, M.G. Ramchandran was like, so foresighted that he thought all of this through. He did not. He was a politician who was acting on the politics of the day. But the nice thing about it is that a generation later, we have these nice things to talk about. And what happened was that other states which were close by sometimes copied it well, sometimes did not. But in 2004, in a little bit of judicial activism, the Supreme Court of India decided that all states should implement it, which, when it comes from top down instead of an organic bottom-up approach, is that there is uneven distribution. And the reason I say that was because now no chief minister in Tamil Nadu, regardless of which party he or she comes from, will be able to touch the midday meal scheme. It's a touchstone of Tamil politics, right? And the reason for that is that, it's people believe that these are our children need to go to school, and therefore, like, it is our job to kind of, pay higher taxes or whatever it is. They have a stake in it as a society, right? But and that will happen if it comes from the bottom up in that particular society. If it comes top down from the Supreme Court of India, it becomes a bureaucratic exercise where people don't have that buy-in, which is the reason.
Neil, if I may interrupt you
Sure.
here, what that has done, because I have a little bit of insight into this. I've been working with Akshay Patra here to set up a kitchen here. So a little bit of study at my end from another perspective. What that has done is the mandate is across the country, midday meal schemes are now compulsory. How they are organized and how much they deliver is a big question mark. We don't hear too many good stories, but it's these NGOs like Akshay Patra and Anna Mitra and so many others who are organized at a massive, what shall I say, corporate level, where they are taking, maybe about 30% from the government in form of food grains and raising the remaining. Just to give you a statistics, 15 rupees, 6 comes from the government, 9 they raise. They're able to feed 20 lakh children every day across 75 kitchens. And that's not just restricted to, it started from the south. So, hey, wonderful. Tamil Nadu has shown us the way, and the rest of the country is actually benefiting from that. So, thank you, Supreme Court, for doing that. And thank you for subsequent governments to actually hold hands with organizations like Akshay Patra, who are actually taking this to the real next level. Imagine feeding 20 lakh children every day without fail, 200 odd days in the year, and at the kind of cost we're talking about, it takes 2,000 rupees to feed a child for the full year. And what that has done is the attendance in school has gone up because you get a full meal, and so many great stories. So, these are great stories. There's so much to discuss, Neil. Our session started a little. I don't know if I can request for another few minutes, but anyway, I'd like to go to the next, the remaining metric which we talked about, economy. We've seen that in the South, your book shows a lot of statistics on that the South has outperformed everybody on yields, equivalent to some of the yields, agriculture yields in the North, whether it's rice production, whether it's water management, and so many other, even things like on the job scene, the LFPR rates are much better in the South, far exceed. The workforce in Tamil Nadu is, okay, let me put it this way. The number of factories in Tamil Nadu are as much as all the northern states put together. Northern in the sense, UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, all of them put together are almost the same as what Tamil Nadu has. Just tells you what kind of progress the South has achieved. I'm just taking Tamil Nadu's case. I'm not even talking about Karnataka. On the front of the health front, this is the other metric we had to come to. The infant mortality rate, Tamil Nadu and the South, whether it's Karnataka or Andhra and Telangana, the IMR rates are something, I think much better.
Right.
There's really no comparison, right?
Right. So consider the state of Kerala, right? Its IMR is 6. The country which has an IMR of 6 is the United States. Consider Madhya Pradesh. Its IMR is 48. The comparable country is Afghanistan and Niger, which are seriously war-torn, troubled places, right? Now, it doesn't matter how clever you are as a bureaucrat sitting in Delhi, it is impossible for you to run these two states with the same policy, right? Nobody in the world is going to argue for the United States and Afghanistan to have the same health policy, right? Except we in India seem to be doing that in some way, shape, or form. Now, and that is the basic problem of overt centralization that I speak about in the book. And many of these and the reason why IMR-A is the metric by which you go to in developing societies to measure the health of a society is that, COVID has taught us that, which is that measuring births and deaths and that as a metric is a far easier and more robust metric compared to morbidity level, how many people got affected, how they were treated, because developing societies do not have good enough data on that. And if you wait for the entire life expectancy, like we discussed earlier, you have to wait 70, 75 years, which is too large a time period. So IMR, tragic as it is that children die within the age of 1, gives you near real-time data in terms of how good a society is doing, because care-seeking behavior, whether you're rich or poor, like, if a parent finds a child sick, they're going to rush that child to a hospital, right? And therefore, it measures the robustness of the health delivery system in a state. And more importantly, children don't die of complicated illnesses which require high-end care. They generally die of dysentery, which are very, very treatable, right? So,
You also talk about the number of beds available per capita, which is far higher in the south than anywhere else in the north. You talk about the under 5 MR, you talk about maternal, mortality rate. All of these metrics are so much better in the south. Having said that, Neil, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to, try to fit in too many things here. Having said that, I have to tell you that I have a personal insight into what happens in the National Health Mission, the way it works. I mean, I'm making case in point for the center now. The National Health Mission, for all your information, works throughout the country, and as far as pediatrics is concerned, they have mapped all the children in the rural parts of India. They have such a fantastic network. I have a personal experience on this one. They practically know every child in the remotest part of the district, which is born with like an abnormality, like congenital malformation, and they have mapped it. The problem is the last mile deliverables. And the last mile deliverables are basically the kind of surgeries these kids need in the government medical colleges, and which are very difficult to for these people to achieve. And so the child gets neglected and on the side. So there are lacunas, but I have to tell you that the health mission works very well. Some brownie points for the centers programs.
so okay. So we need to differentiate a couple of things here, right? Like the center, what has the union government done? Like the NRHM, or what used to be called the NRHM, and it's now called NHM. They've set up an extensive data collection mechanism, and they've kind of sort of forced state bureaucracies to report that data into the union, right? Like I used to work, in a different capacity for what was the Tamil Nadu's hospitals information systems, right? Now, it is true that they collect robust data, but there again, we have to be very careful. I'll give you one metric to sort of indicate that, right? How many children who are born are actually registered with the government within 21 days of their birth, so that this data can actually flow through? If you look at the southern states, it's close to 100%. If you look at the northern states, it's like less than 7. Yeah, less than 7. Like it's a much lower number, right? And therefore there is that original.
That's because the institutional births are not there.
Institutional births are not there, and that if you have a child being not delivered in a hospital, and instead a midwife or some such thing happens in somebody's house, that becomes problematic in the first case, and nobody sitting in Delhi is going to change that. That needs like bottom up intervention, right? And how did the southern states do this? Like there are examples in the book, which is that the states of Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, basically in various ways and form. But in Tamil Nadu, for instance, they gave gold chains and rings to nurses who achieved zero IMR and went into every single village and entered every woman in the reproductive age, and kind of intrusively.
Is that populism?
Yeah, maybe, right? But hey, it delivered IMR. So who are we to argue against that, right? And worse, they sometimes monitored, the menstrual cycles of women in reproductive age. I'm not going to argue for that, but the point is that because they did that, they gave 4 antenatal care visits to women who were pregnant, because of which there was low IMR, MMR, and the child who was subsequently born had fewer cases of malnutrition and stunting, right?
Neil, I'd like to, what shall I say, compliment this, because what happens is, if there is very good prenatal care and of course postnatal care, but prenatal care more importantly, and the nutrition is taken care of, then the incidence of birth defects are literally very low. We live in Nagpur. Let me tell you, around our parts, there are hundreds and hundreds, thousands of children who are born with some kind of defects which you would not believe. Like, there are so many incidents of children born without esophagus. That has got nothing, no esophagus. The very first day the mother realizes that the child is not ingressing milk. There are children born with bent spines. How do you explain this? Thalassemia as well. So apart from that, I mean, these are such terrible what shall I say, diseases to have, or malformations, not more than disease, malformations, that the child is practically a reject. I'm sorry to use the word. The only way is surgeries. The only way is to give them, it's all post. But if you can take care of nutrition of the mother well in advance, and there is good prenatal care, then, and I'll tell you why. I mean, my personal experience. We do some camps here. We did in the south also, in Manipal, and we were struggling to find children. And we have overload of children here. We are not even able to cover those children. We do about 200 cases with an NGO. We do this, and there are a few hundreds remaining. In the south, we literally did those camps, and we did not find enough. We had to struggle to find children. That's definitely the outcome of the inputs, and that's all part of policy, and that's part of leadership. So I would like you to speak on that. Please.
Sure. So I want to make sure that when we say leadership, we don't fall into this familiar trap of the great man theory, right? Like, there was this, I don't know, C. N. Annadurai or M. Karunanidhi or J. Jayalalitha or Pinarayi Vijayan or, N.T. Ramarao or, whoever the case may be, right? The reason why these policies as a compact in a social democracy came up was because there was genuine demand for that, and these societies which had a high degree of subnationalism had a politics which could deliver that, right? And that is the reason why these policies came about. Like the reason why the midday meal scheme is a touchstone of Tamil politics is precisely that. It's not as if tomorrow some leader can come in and undo that, right? And however, leadership is important in that in the initial thrust that it gave in 1982, or, Jayalalitha, for instance, had this gold rings and gold chains to all these white sari-clad women walking the streets of villages to sort of, implement this antenatal and prenatal care, right? And it became very, very popular that those nurses felt very, very important, and they had high status in those villages, right? Like that. It's a leadership initiated thing, but once the policy is demanded by the public and is organic, it becomes a thing of its own, and no politician will be able to undo that in the future. And therefore, what we want is a systemic stability in all these policy regimes. And hopefully that's the reason I have the last third of the book, which sort of prescribes an alternative method of democracy, so to speak.
Thank you, Neil, for all your insights. Just before we throw open for question answers, we have a few minutes left, I hope, for Q&A. Yeah, just about. But there's a very interesting part of the book, which I want Neil to share with us. It's the how the center. I mean, we know that it's a balancing act. There are so many schemes from the center which the center funds 50%, like the JNURM and all the PM Awas Yojanas and so many of those hundreds of schemes where the center funds in money straight down to the, it goes straight to the beneficiaries. And that's the impression we have that, it's working well. And the state puts their bit into it. So maybe that's a balancing act. Whether there are solutions for decentralization is something I want you to talk about. The one which they did in, when was it, 1917 or was it early? I mean, 2017, was it when they did the TFR divide by 1971 census? Can you explain that, please? And what it did to the sharing?
Right. So yes, we'll do that before. So much of the resource allocation in this country happens through especially monetary resource allocations, right? Like you and I, most people in this room, majority of our taxes go to the government in Delhi. We pay very little taxes either to your city administration in Nagpur or the state government in Bombay, right? The way in which that tax money gets devolved back to you is through this complicated process of the Finance Commission, right? Now, until the previous Finance Commission, a majority, until the 13th Finance Commission, that is, the entirety of the population number in order for, which will go as input metric to all of these, the 1971 population numbers for the reasons that we just discussed, right? In the 14th Finance Commission, they took 10% of 2011 because, by that time, the 2011 data had come out. In the 15th Finance Commission, which is where we are now, they decided to have the entire input metric of population for this devolution as 2011 data. If you do that, what happens? Which is that naturally there are more people in Uttar Pradesh now than there were in 1971, and there are the growth rate corresponding in Kerala or Karnataka or in Tamil Nadu is far lesser, and therefore that devolution is going to result in lesser money flowing into these states, right? So when this terms of reference came in 2017, a lot of people, primarily me, made a lot of noise because we did some correlation analysis and basically said that, if you do this, you're punishing success and rewarding failure, right? So please don't do this. So, well, the government in its wisdom and, the Prime Minister's office, etc., basically said that do not worry about this. What we will do is we will introduce population performance as a metric into the, the factors for calculating what is the allocation ratio, right? Now, so far so good. If the government of India tells you something, you take that in good faith, right? Now, what happened was that when the final report came in, if you read the first half of the report alone, it will look okay, except the allocation ratio will look weird. They did add something called a population performance. It was part of the calculations. Everything looked good, except the actual allocation ratio still didn't look good at all. It looked as if they had taken, our worries had come through, but it looked as if, nothing, they had kept their word. And then you read the annexures, right? That is when, what they had done was, they had taken population performance as a metric to be 1 divided by the fertility rate, right? Fertility rate is the number of children that a woman has, right? And as we have discussed earlier, that in the Indo-Gangetic Plains is close to 3. In southern states, it's like somewhere between 1.5 and 2, right? Like, if you just take that alone and have that, it would probably have had a much greater impact. Except what they did was they took that 1 by fertility rate and then scaled it with the actual population of each state in 2011, right? And you can imagine the actual population of Uttar Pradesh is 203 million, right? So it's just, what is called the law of large numbers. If you multiply a very small number with a very large number, the large number is going to overpower the small number, right? And if you did a simple correlation analysis, the eventual output of it was more correlated with 20 of population performance, mind you, whose entire purpose was to be more correlated with 1971 than it is with 2011. But after their scaling, it ended up being more correlated with 2011, in fact, almost identical to 2011 compared to 1971 population, simply because of the law of large numbers. And it's almost like some bureaucrat in Delhi decided we were not going to read annexures.
Neil, nevertheless, I see that Andhra was 6.64 as the inter share for demographic performance. Because of this calculation came down to 3, and Tamil Nadu, which was like 10, now it came down, where is it? Tamil Nadu?
4.1 or something.
4.1, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, at this point, I think we've really run out of time. So much to discuss with you, but I'll throw it open for a couple of questions. May I have the first question from Dilip Bhai, please?
You talked in terms of correcting this through devolving more powers to the states. I see a problem there with the kind of politicians we have all throughout India and their track record. Would it not result in something of what happened to USSR?
That is a fair question, right? Like, this was a fundamental question that Dr. Ambedkar had when he originally designed our constitution, which is that he skewed the union such that the skew was towards the union and not towards the states. And his reasoning was slightly different from yours and mine, which is that he worried about elite capture at state and local governments compared to the union. But 70 years of our experience has shown that it's not just the state and local governments which are susceptible to elite capture. Delhi is equally susceptible to elite capture, right? So the idea that, like the central government is a superior government which comes and rescues state and local governments, Maharashtra, for instance, is bigger than most countries. To argue that we need Delhi to come and tell Maharashtra what to do with its internal corruption is kind of an insult to the political dignity of Maharashtra, right? And that is true for Tamil Nadu as well, and it is true for Kerala. Like Tamil Nadu is, by any metric, is a highly corrupt state, right? But, well, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We have an IMR comparable to OECD countries. So what do you want, right?
Next question, please.
Hi, Neil. I'm Supant. In this north-south binary, what does your data reveal about the northeastern states?
Okay. Let me just answer that. For statistical purposes, I have considered the states that send greater than or equal to 9 MPs as my threshold. And because of that threshold, I've left out northeastern states for the most part. And they're again it's very difficult to bring them into such an analysis because A, each of them is very small. B, the effect of union governments on them is very, very high. So it's very difficult to isolate cause and effect there. So I've not done that.
Okay, next question, please.
Okay, Neil, when we are talking about this particular divide, is population and literacy the only two parameters we are talking about, or is it also in terms of the basic cultural differences that North and South would have anyway had?
This is something that Mr. Nayak asked me, and I want to be very, very clear. Every single data point here is a measurable data point, right? Which is, in health, in education, in economy, in finance commission allocation ratio, so on and so forth. I would like to assume that I am a child of enlightenment, wherein ethnic essentialism is not an import on culture, on policy. Right? We are all the same, hopefully, and that with the right circumstances, we will arrive at some version of right policy for our societies. If we were to have, because you are X, therefore you do Y, it is a dangerous territory that I don't want to venture into.
हेलो सर
So the last question for this session.
सर थोड़ा अलग हटके है अदरवाइज नहीं लीजिएगा
Sir, short रखिए हम लोग
हाँ,
next
हाँ,
session के लिए.
हाँ,
Sir, I must warn you, I don't follow Hindi.
हाँ, एक मिनट दक्षिण भारत के जो लोग हैं वो हिंदी से क्यों नफरत करना चाहते हैं
I think we will
So,
we will restrict this discussion,
yeah,
sir, to the topic here, and we'll on that note.
सर मैं आपको एक सजेशन देना चाहूंगा ये डिस्कशन जब सर अवेलेबल है नीचे
हाँ, हम
आपके
वहाँ कर
shadow
लेंगे।
के साथ में आप उनसे बात कर सकते हैं
Please.
सो दैट ही कैन
और आपको इंटरप्रेटर लगेगा।
योर पॉइंट
ये
ऑफ व्यू
सबके मन में ये सवाल पैदा होता है
जी सर आई कंप्लीटली अंडरस्टैंड बट कैसे अभी समय का थोड़ा अभाव है हमारे हाथ में
कंपेयर कर रहे हैं इतनी सब चीजें तो ये भी होता ही है।
जरूर हम बात करेंगे इस पे. So thank you everyone. It's a wonderful audience. A big round of applause for the last sentence he said that we are all the same. I think उसमें आपका उत्तर है जो इन्होंने आखिरी में बताया.
completely understand sir in fact
One thing which remained was the solution he offers. Just read this one
Right.
line for us. He has a great solution which I advise you to take up with him when offline.
One thought experiment is worth examining, a gamified direct democracy that bridges the democracy of ancient Athens with modern guardrails to sidestep balkanization and yet achieve a decentralized polity. This would aim for enlightened liberalism achieved through conservative system design, something like a blockchain for democracy.
I would advise all of you, many of you who are interested in his solution, to meet him offline. I was really impressed with it. Thank you, Neil, for coming all the way and gracing us with your knowledge. And I highly recommend this book from my side. Thank you.
Yeah, so exactly
you very
concur. In fact, it was a very enlightening session, and I definitely hope that there will come a day soon where no matter what we do, everything will be fair and equal. Right? And just 1 second. So, because you're here, you have guided us so well. We want to make a gesture of commemoration. For that, we have a live painting made especially for you by Riddhi Joshi, an artist from the Alag Angle community, and I request Jeetu sir to please hand it over on our behalf. Big round of applause, everybody. This painting has been made especially for. It represents the thought, the process, the author. The book, South versus North, India's Great Divide, is available downstairs for signing. So will be the author. Please seek him out at his convenience. And thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Jeetu sir.